They didn't argue, they didn't cry, they didn't send you a long message explaining everything you did wrong. They just vanished. And the most terrifying part? You never saw it coming. What if I told you that the most emotionally intelligent people on this planet have a silent threshold for a day, and the moment you cross it, they don't fight back, they don't beg, they execute the cleanest exit you will ever witness. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly why empaths disappear, and more importantly, whether you have already pushed one away forever. Think about the most emotionally aware person you've ever known, the one who always seemed to feel everything a little too deeply, the one who noticed your mood before you even spoke a word, the one who gave and gave and gave until one day, without warning, they were simply gone. That person was an empath, and what happened between you and them was not an accident. It was a psychological sequence, and every step of it was set in motion by something you did or failed to do. If this is already hitting close to home, drop a 1 in the comments right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and do not leave before the final section. It will change how you see every relationship you have. Now let us begin. There is a particular kind of person in this world who processes reality differently from everyone else. Not better, not worse. Differently, in a way that is both their greatest gift and their most devastating vulnerability. These are the people who walk into a room and immediately, without any conscious effort, absorb the emotional atmosphere around them. They feel the tension before the argument breaks out. They sense your grief before you acknowledge it yourself. They carry the weight of other people's pain as though it were their own. Because to them, in every neurological and psychological sense, it genuinely is. We call these people empaths, and the world, quite frankly, does not know what to do with them. Because here is the paradox at the center of every empath's life. The very quality that makes them irreplaceable, their extraordinary capacity to feel, is the same quality that makes them profoundly susceptible to damage. They are not weak. Let me be absolutely clear about that. Empaths are among the most emotionally resilient people alive, but resilience is not infinite. And every empath on this earth has a breaking point, a line drawn in the depths of their nervous system that, once crossed, triggers something that most people never anticipate: silence. Not the dramatic silence of someone who wants to be chased. Not the performative silence of someone staging a withdrawal to get attention. I am talking about the deep, final, irreversible silence of someone who has made a decision, a person who has looked at the full picture of what you represent to them and concluded with devastating emotional clarity that their peace is worth more than your presence. When an empath disappears, they disappear completely. No scenes, no ultimatums, no public grievances, just a quiet surgical removal of themselves from your world. And you are left standing in the space they used to occupy, wondering what happened. What happened is that you did something, or several things, possibly without knowing, possibly without caring, but the sequence was set in motion long before the moment they walked away. Let us go through it, slowly, precisely, and honestly. The first thing that drives an empath away is chronic emotional dismissal, not cruelty, not abuse, not grand acts of betrayal, something far more insidious and far more common. It is the quiet, repeated act of making someone feel that what they feel does not matter. It is the rolled eyes when they express concern. It is the "you're too sensitive" delivered like a diagnosis. It is the subject change every time the conversation turns to something they are genuinely struggling with. Understand what is happening inside an empath when you do this. They are not simply feeling hurt in the way most people feel hurt. Their entire emotional processing system, which is far more active, far more interconnected, and far more sensitive than the average person's, receives your dismissal as a full-body signal. It registers not just as social rejection, but as a kind of psychological invalidation. You're not just ignoring what they said. You are telling them that the way they experience reality is wrong, that the depth of their feeling is a defect. And an empath, because they are who they are, will not immediately confront you about this. They will absorb it. They will reflect on it. They will wonder if perhaps you are right, if perhaps they are too much, too intense, too feeling. They will make themselves smaller. They will edit themselves. They will bring you a quieter, more manageable version of themselves in hopes that this version will be easier to love. But here is what is happening underneath that performance. Every time they silence themselves to make you comfortable, they are accumulating a kind of emotional debt, not toward you, but within themselves. A growing awareness that who they actually are is not welcome in this relationship, and that awareness does not fade. It calcifies. It becomes a slow, quiet certainty that no amount of effort on their part will make this space safe for them. And the first crack in the foundation appears here. You may not see it, they may not show it, but it is there. The second behavior that pushes an empath toward the exit is what psychologists call emotional manipulation, specifically the weaponization of their empathy against them. An empath's greatest strength is their ability to feel what you feel. A manipulative personality, consciously or unconsciously, will learn to exploit this. They will deploy emotion as currency. Guilt becomes a tool. Vulnerability becomes leverage. The empath's capacity for compassion becomes the very mechanism through which they are controlled. You see this in the person who escalates their distress the moment the empath tries to establish a boundary. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the boundary. It is about how much the boundary hurt the other person. The empath, wired to respond to pain, immediately abandons the boundary to tend to the wound their own self-protection apparently caused. And the manipulator, again, this may be entirely unconscious, learns emotional escalation dissolves their boundaries. File that information away. Use it again next time. Over time, the empath begins to experience something that researchers in the field of interpersonal neuroscience describe as a kind of internal dissonance. They can feel the manipulation happening. Their nervous system recognizes the pattern even when their conscious mind tries to explain it away. They feel simultaneously pulled to help and alarmed by the situation drawing them in. They feel compassion and resentment existing in the same emotional space, which creates a kind of psychological friction that is deeply exhausting. They will give you more chances than you deserve. They will find more justifications for your behavior than logic warrants, because that is the architecture of their inner world. They lead with compassion always. They assume the best always. They believe in the possibility of change always, but empaths are not naive forever. There is a moment, and it is always a specific moment, even if they cannot name it, when the understanding arrives fully formed, when the pattern becomes undeniable, when the empathy they have extended toward you turns around and shows them the full, unobstructed truth of what this dynamic actually is. And in that moment, something shifts at a fundamental level. They do not become cold, they become clear. And clarity in an empath is more powerful than anger could ever be. The third thing that ensures an empath will leave is the consistent violation of their emotional boundaries, particularly after those boundaries have been communicated. Let me be precise about this because it is important. Empaths do not set boundaries easily. They have often spent years, and sometimes their entire lives, being conditioned to believe that having needs is selfish, that needing space is rejection, that asking for anything is asking for too much. When an empath finally arrives at a place of enough self-awareness to name a boundary and speak it out loud to you, that is not a small moment. That is an act of significant psychological courage. When you violate that boundary, especially repeatedly, especially after being told, you are not just crossing a line, you are communicating something at the deepest relational level. You are telling them that their needs are not real to you, that your comfort matters more than their peace, that the relationship will operate on your terms regardless of what they express. And here is where the empath's psychology becomes critical to understand. Because of how their nervous system is wired, they do not just perceive this message abstractly, they feel it physically, emotionally, viscerally. The boundary violation does not just register as a relational failure. It registers as an unsafe environment. And when an environment feels unsafe to an empath, everything in them shifts toward one ultimate goal: exit. Not dramatically, not immediately in most cases, but the decision is made at a level that precedes language, precedes conscious strategy. The organism has assessed the situation and concluded, this is not a safe place for me to be. And once that conclusion is reached, everything that follows is simply the quiet, methodical process of leaving. The fourth behavior, and this one is perhaps the least discussed, but among the most damaging, is the absence of reciprocity. Empaths are extraordinary givers. This is not self-congratulation on their part. It is simply the natural expression of how they process other people. When they see someone struggling, the helping impulse is not a choice, it is a reflex. They will sit with you through your 3 a.m. They will remember the details of your struggles that even you have forgotten. They will adjust their behavior to protect your feelings, even at cost to themselves. They will show up reliably, generously, completely. What erodes them is not generosity itself. What erodes them is generosity that exists in a relational vacuum. The relationship where they perpetually invest and you perpetually withdraw, where every emotional transaction runs in one direction, where they ask how you are out of genuine interest and you ask how they are as social reflex, and you have never once noticed the difference between those two questions. The tragedy here is that empaths rarely announce this imbalance. They will not hand you an invoice for their emotional labor. They will not stage a confrontation about the inequality. What they will do, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, is begin to conserve themselves. They will call a little less, initiate a little less, be present a little less, not as punishment, as self-preservation. The research on human connection is unambiguous on this point. Sustainable emotional bonds require what we call felt mutuality, the experience by both people of being genuinely seen and considered. When that experience is absent for too long, the attachment begins to erode, not through conflict, but through a quiet, cellular process of withdrawal that is nearly impossible to reverse once it reaches a certain stage. By the time you notice the empath pulling away, they are usually already most of the way gone. The fifth behavior is one that cuts to the very core of who an empath is: inauthenticity. Empaths are, almost universally, drawn to authenticity with an intensity that most people find difficult to understand. Truth for them is not just a preference. It is a fundamental relational requirement. They can forgive weakness. They can navigate complexity. They can hold space for contradiction and ambiguity and human imperfection. What they cannot do, what their entire nervous system resists with every available resource, is sustained connection with someone who is not real with them. The person who performs rather than communicates, who presents a curated version of themselves and never allows the deeper layer to be seen, who says "I'm fine" as a permanent policy, who is charming in company and absent in private, who has mastered the vocabulary of emotional connection without ever actually inhabiting it. An empath will feel this inauthenticity the way a musician feels a note played slightly out of tune. They may not be able to explain it immediately. They may doubt their own perception, especially if you are skilled at the performance. But over time, the dissonance accumulates. The gap between what you project and what they sense becomes impossible to paper over. And this matters enormously to an empath because connection, for them, is not a casual thing. They do not do surface relationships well, not because they are incapable of social navigation, but because shallow connection does not meet their fundamental need. They need to know the real person. They need to be known in return. When that depth is inaccessible, when you are perpetually presenting a surface and refusing to go deeper, the empath eventually concludes that the relationship has no real foundation. You cannot build a home on performance, and an empath will not keep trying to. The sixth, and perhaps most quietly devastating thing you can do to an empath is use their insight against them. Empaths see people clearly, uncomfortably clearly sometimes. They notice the pattern in your behavior before you have acknowledged it yourself. They observe the inconsistency between what you say and what you do. They feel the subtext of conversations that you thought were perfectly masked. They know, in that wordless, immediate way that is the hallmark of high emotional perception, when something is wrong, even when you are insisting that everything is fine. What do many people do when they feel seen this clearly? They become defensive. They gaslight. They tell the empath they are imagining things, overanalyzing, projecting. They turn the empath's perception back on them as a character flaw. You're paranoid, you're too intense, you always make everything about feelings. This is one of the most psychologically damaging things you can do to an empath, because it targets the very faculty that defines them. You are not just disagreeing with an interpretation. You are attacking their fundamental instrument of understanding the world. You are telling them that the thing they trust most, their own perception, is broken. And empaths, because of their tendency toward self-examination and self-doubt, are particularly vulnerable to this form of attack. They will go inside and scrutinize themselves. They will wonder if they are wrong. They will apologize for seeing what they saw. They will work to unsee it, but they cannot unsee it permanently. The perception remains, and with it, a growing understanding of what you are doing and why you are doing it. And when that understanding becomes complete, when the empath has finally stopped arguing against their own clarity, what you will encounter is not anger. What you will encounter is an absence. Now, I want to speak directly to those of you who are recognizing yourself in this, not as the empath, but as the person who did these things. Because here is what the research on emotional intelligence consistently reveals. The behaviors I have described are rarely the product of malice. They are almost always the product of deficits, of emotional education that was never provided, of attachment patterns formed in early life that were never examined, of coping strategies that made sense in one context and became destructive in another. The person who dismisses emotion often learned early on that emotion was dangerous, that feeling was weakness, that vulnerability invited harm. The person who manipulates through emotion may never have been taught any other currency of connection. The person who cannot reciprocate may have spent their formative years in relationships where they were not given to either, and so they arrived in adulthood without the relational muscle memory that reciprocity requires. This does not excuse the behavior, but it locates it. It removes it from the realm of pure character defect and places it where it actually belongs, in the realm of patterns that can, with awareness and genuine effort, be changed. The critical variable here is awareness, and this is the step that most people stop short of, action. Because here is what emotional intelligence research tells us about sustainable change. Awareness without behavioral follow-through is simply more sophisticated self-deception. You can understand why you do something in exquisite psychological detail and still keep doing it if you are not willing to endure the discomfort of doing differently. Real change is not an insight. Real change is a new choice made repeatedly in the moments when the old pattern feels most compelling. And now I want to speak to the empaths in the room, because everything I have described, the dismissal, the manipulation, the boundary violations, the imbalance, the inauthenticity, the gaslighting, none of it required your permission. It happened to you in the ordinary course of being who you are in a world that does not always know how to treat you. But I want you to understand something about your disappearing. When you leave, when you execute that clean, quiet exit, you are not failing. You are not being cold. You are not being unforgiving or dramatic or too sensitive. You are engaging in an act of profound self-knowledge. You have learned through direct experience that certain environments are incompatible with your well-being, and you have honored that knowledge. That is not weakness. That is one of the most sophisticated forms of emotional self-regulation that exists. The disappearance of an empath is not abandonment. It is the consequence of a threshold being reached. It is the organism protecting itself after every other signal was ignored. It is the final dignified assertion of a person who has tried everything else and arrived at the understanding that some losses are necessary and some exits are not endings but beginnings. What I want you to examine, however, and I offer this with care, not criticism, is whether disappearing has become your default response to difficulty. Because the capacity for clean exit is healthy. The compulsion to exit before genuine repair is ever attempted, that is a different thing. And empaths, precisely because they feel so deeply, are sometimes tempted to exit at the first sign of real danger because real danger feels to them enormously loud. The question worth sitting with is this: did you communicate what you needed clearly and repeatedly before you left? Did you allow the other person the genuine opportunity to understand, not just sense that something was wrong, but actually know what would need to change and why? Because empaths sometimes communicate in emotional frequency rather than explicit language. They feel that if someone truly cared, they would simply know. And that expectation, while understandable, is not always fair. Not everyone reads emotional frequency. Not everyone has access to the same inner compass you carry. Some people need language. Some people need very specific, very explicit communication of what is happening and what is needed. And if you left before providing that, it is worth asking yourself, is this disappearance wisdom or is it protection masquerading as wisdom? The deepest truth of this entire conversation is this: relationships are not survival contests. They are not experiments in how much one person can absorb before they fracture. They are not proving grounds for emotional endurance. They are, at their best, environments of mutual recognition, spaces where two people, through consistent, authentic, reciprocal engagement, come to know and be known by another human being. Empaths thrive in those environments with extraordinary depth and loyalty. They will show up for you in ways that will redefine your understanding of what it means to be accompanied through life. They will see you in your darkness and not flinch. They will remember what you said 6 months ago and ask you about it today. They will feel your joy almost as intensely as you feel it yourself. They are, quite simply, among the most profound relational experiences available to a human being, but they require something in return, not perfection, not a matching level of emotional intensity, simply this: honesty, presence, and the basic willingness to consider what another person needs. If you have lost an empath, if one of these remarkable, complex, deeply feeling people has quietly stepped back from your life, I want you to sit with the question of what role you played in that. Not as self-punishment, not as a reason to spiral into guilt, but as a genuine act of inquiry. Because the capacity to honestly examine our own behavior, to look at what we did and name it accurately and ask ourselves whether we could do differently, that is the foundation of emotional growth. That is ultimately what separates the person who keeps losing people from the person who learns to keep them. And if they are still close enough to hear you, not through a dramatic gesture, not through a single conversation that you believe will fix everything, through the slow, consistent daily practice of showing up differently, of choosing honesty when performance would be easier, of staying in the room when you feel the urge to deflect, of asking how they are and then actually listening, not to respond, but to understand. Empaths do not need you to be extraordinary. They need you to be real. And if you can offer them that genuinely, sustainably, without retreating the moment it requires something of you, you may discover that what you thought was gone is not entirely beyond reach. But know this: a recovered empath is not the same as an unwounded one. They carry the memory